Welcome to the State of the Nation. I'm your host, Mike Sham, and as you know, we have been following the Government of National Unity and the South African political scene very, very closely. And now and again, you'll see analysis on the subject that's worth having on this particular platform, the State of the Nation. And one of the articles that caught my eye was written by one of my favorite opinion piece writers, and he is a community activist, trade unionist, and a person who you should be following on News 24, and that is Ebrahim Harvey. Ebrahim, welcome back to the State of the Nation.
Good morning. Good morning to you, and good to be with you.
Yeah, now we spoke before the election. We spoke on a few issues, but we haven't spoken since the election has been run and the formation of the Government of National Unity. So we've got a little bit of catching up to do. But let's talk about one of the big features, obviously, by now we all know, was the unexpectedly very, very positive showing of Mkhonto weSizwe. I think when we all spoke about, pre-election, we had them getting some votes, but I don't think there were many analysts that anticipated them getting close on 15% and becoming the third biggest party.
Yeah. No, definitely a big surprise, but it's symptomatic. The fact that MK did so very well. Let me try to explain this context to you. It's very important. Without the context, you will not understand why the MK party did so. I mean, it was not even a year old. It's never happened ever in the history of this country that a party just formed like that, certainly not in post-apartheid South Africa, does so remarkably well. And you can see they were so confident that they demanded a recount of the votes because, I mean, can you believe it? They thought they did even better. They either would deserve to get the second spot or even bloody win the whole election, But it's, I've covered this area a lot in my News 24 columns, and my radio, TV interviews. I dealt with it again, SABC interview Friday, Power FM yesterday morning, radio, These issues are coming up all the time because MK is definitely the biggest news, the biggest surprising development of post-apartheid South Africa. On the whole, take it from me, nothing has shocked us as much as how well MK did. I mean, and become the third biggest party in South Africa and supplant the EFF. I mean, there's no doubt, especially in KZN, I think a considerable number of EFF supporters threw their weight into the MK, which is partly why, the support for EFF dropped. There might have been some other contributing factors, but I think the MK party was the biggest factor to which you can attribute the reason, the drop of the EFF support. So the very interesting dynamics you see here in KZN. And one of the hallmarks of the KZN politics is the centrality of the figure of Jacob Zuma. And there are huge socio-cultural traditional factors behind that considerable support that he still enjoys. And I'll tell you one of the biggest problems, Mike, biggest problems, when Isupahat was still alive, he had this thing that he ran, The Thinker magazine, The Thinker. I did a piece on this thing, I think 15 years ago or more, explaining what the demographics of South Africa, the racial demographics, what severe implications it has had. And I have to raise this because, it explains why Zuma is still the big shot. I mean, he's facing corruption charges related to the arms deal. He's got charges related to when he was head of state, the SOE's corruption, a whole lot of stuff. And still, he's the leader of MK, and look how well they do. What does it tell you, Mike? It takes average intelligence. You don't have to be a big shot or a master's or PhD or anything. Just average intelligence will tell you. And it's not just in KZN. It's generally in this country, let me tell you. And, I want to be specific. I was very specific in my book, The Great Pretenders, Race and Class Under ANC Rule. My editor was Colin Bundy in London. He said to my publisher, Jacana, my God, what this guy is saying in this book, nobody has said before. I mean, confronting cultural issues, African people, a whole lot of stuff, Mike. And we have to face this. I'm telling you, I don't see it. I don't see that courage, that talking truth to power, and the power of the narratives that are emerging, and why, and the dynamics. We don't do that. We need to do that, Mike. There's a thing where people don't care a damn about corruption. Mike, it's deeply rooted. It's deeply rooted in the ANC. It's deeply rooted in KZN. They don't care a damn. Whatever you allege, their leaders did, corruption, whatever, nothing. It is one of the most serious indictments of our political culture in South Africa. And let me be frank with you, it particularly confronts, let me make it very clear, Mike, so-called African voters, so-called African people. I want to be very specific. Yeah, and there are deep issues there. I don't want to get into it now. You need a separate to address that. Why? More than other so-called minorities and their voting patterns and the political dynamics and why they continue to vote, much more pervasive. I'm not saying it doesn't operate elsewhere with the so-called minorities, but I'm telling you, it's a huge problem. And that is the reason why Kgalema Motlanthe, the former president with authorized biography I wrote, says repeatedly to me, Ebrahim, our biggest problem, and he's speaking to this, the very thing I'm talking to you, he says we need political education. We need, he keeps on ad nauseum. We need why? He's speaking to these issues, Mike. It's a serious problem. I mean, I don't want to go into it. People hardly read. We don't have a reading culture in this country. We don't have a debating culture. You can go and see on Facebook even. I don't want to talk about their racialized issues, discourses on Facebook. Go and see who are the people who pursue issues or global issues, whatever it is, and who are the issues people who don't want to go near. The European Renaissance, what happened in the French Revolution. No, they're not interested. You see it on Facebook, Mike. Let me tell you, and you know what helps you in South Africa? If you want to look at, the whole ethnic, racial thing of the discourses, you know what you look at? Because it's a very reliable indicator, except for a few exceptions, surnames. You look at surnames, Mike. That is where you go on Facebook, go and see what I'm talking about. You look at if you doubt, hey, whose identity, who is the colored, is a white Indian, you look at surnames. All I'm saying, Mike, we have very serious problems in this country. And Kgalema Motlanthe, that's the reason why he says, Ebrahim, our biggest problem is this lack of political education. And it's to do with the political culture, Mike. People don't think, we don't have any electorate that's your electorate in France or in Britain or London. No, it's a different, they got a whole history of democracy in these countries. I mean, the levels of literacy and education are far higher. There are lots of things, Mike. I'm giving you this bit of background because it's critical importance to assess why MK won.
Yeah, I suppose to your point, if one goes back to the famous or infamous Polokwane conference back in 2007,
yes,
when the country was in the middle of some meaningful economic growth, making a dent on some of our social ills. And in essence, it turned out to be a vote for a continuation of that process or the tolerance of corruption by supporting Jacob Zuma back then. We can see what happened. And then, of course, he did get a majority in his first election as the ANC candidate.
Yes, but there's something you mustn't miss out on. Let me just get in there because I've gone deep into this matter. When I did Motlante's biography. Mike, that hits the nail on the head. There you have it. And you got to start there, even when you address this question of Zuma's popularity, despite and in spite of all the allegations of corruption. Mbeki fired Zuma in June 2005. He fired him following the Hillary Judge Squire's judgment when he found there was well, it's been disputed. A Squire said that he didn't say it, that there was a generally corrupt relationship between Zuma and Shabir Sheikh. But nevertheless, you know, Mbeki, when I interviewed Mbeki, you know what he told me, Mike? He said, I asked him, would you do the same thing again? Fire Zuma. He says, Ebrahim, I will absolutely do the same thing again. It's very interesting, Mike. I mean, and him and Zuma come together from exile. I'm saying to you, do you see how deeply rooted is the problem? They after Mbeki fired him, they elected Zuma over Mbeki in Polokwane. What, 18 months, 20 months later? Can you believe that? And that same man now leads MK. Can you see how this thing gets extended and lengthened? The same man leads MK, despite all the charges of the arms deal corruption and so much. What does it tell you? Come on, Mike. Average intelligence tells you they don't care a damn. I almost said F. They don't care a damn about what you say about their leaders. They don't care a damn about corruption, allegations, whatever, fraud, nothing. It's a very serious problem because you know what, Mike? Corruption globally has become such a big problem that if voters lack an elementary awareness and consciousness of this scourge that has to be combated, I mean, what are we talking about really? This is what happens in South Africa. Why do you think the ANC's returned to power until the 29th of May when they lost it? The same reasons, Mike. The same reasons. Let me tell you, a lot of those people are illiterate. There's a lot of problems of illiteracy and lack of formal education, you know, especially in the rural areas. You think, no, there's no political consciousness that discriminates and guides how voting patterns. Is traditional. You know, ANC was the biggest component of the national liberation struggle in this country, you know, and you can say those loyalties are wearing very thin. And there, the dramatic announcement, the ANC lost the 29th May election. But don't forget, they never just happened. The ANC lost the powerhouse of production and nerve center of the economy, Gauteng, Joburg, Metro, Ekurhuleni, Tshwane. They lost it in 2016, and they lost it again in 2021. So there you can see, you know, maybe it's very good signs. And then the ANC lost 29th of May. A slumbering electorate waking up slowly and steadily.
Yeah. Well, you know, we haven't been fired by Pace Car Rental because they're still keeping the State of the Nation going. So if you're watching this, go and support Pace Car Rental. And it helps to keep us on the air to answer the important questions. Now, Ebrahim, to your point, you mentioned earlier that that clearly MK, you know, had enough confidence to even challenge the outcome of the election. But one of the other, on the other hand, they looked ill prepared for the kind of success they enjoyed, and we've seen a merry-go-round of parliamentarians and office bearers within Umkhonto we Sizwe. Firstly, what does that tell you? And secondly, you know, to your recent article where you said, is this a return to the gangster state? Because, you know, firstly, let's deal with the issue of Umkhonto we Sizwe doing very well, and you've outlined those factors, but then immediately seeming unprepared for that. What do you think?
Yeah, well, you know what can you expect but that they will be unprepared for their very dramatic success? Just think for yourself. Parliamentary politics, there's a lot of things involved, Mike. And Zuma knows that. He's been in parliament, all that. You can imagine about MK. I mean, you mustn't also confuse the success of MK party with with only the popularity of Zuma, as much as I said what I did. No, I did a column for News 24 in which I explained that the voting for MK and their dramatic success was in spite of the limitations, in spite of the corruption allegations against Zuma. It spoke to what, Mike? And one of the key places in this country where people are struggling to put food on the table is the cost of living crisis, the poverty, malnutrition, unemployment is KZN. You see, Mike, what has happened is that the ANC started with this radical economic transformation, the EFF, etc. Now, in the minds of the masses, they seem to associate anything, radical phraseology, terminology with change in conditions, of their lives. This to me, and then, you must remember that MK success comes against the backdrop of the dramatic political decline of the ANC itself. I mean, EFF comes from the ANC. MK comes from the ANC. You got to see how this thing has fractured in post-apartheid South Africa. The unity that existed in the ANC before as an organization, as a ruling party, has splintered, has fractured completely. And you can see, so the MK comes from that tradition. But it's less the popularity, I argue. I've argued on many platforms after the election results, that it mustn't be interpreted solely as you may think I was doing, that it's a blindness, a Zuma loyalty blindness. No, people want, Mike, we have the biggest socioeconomic crisis of poverty, unemployment, and raging social inequalities that we have ever had. I think I have to emphasize this because I think people don't realize the extent of it. It's never been so bad, even during the darkest days of apartheid, Mike. Listen to me. We have the Union of South Africa in 1910. From 1910 up until now, through the darkest days of apartheid. Mike, do you know what's happening now in this country? It's terrible. I mean, malnutrition, hunger, poverty all over the country. Far worse, obviously, for reasons, in the rural areas. And under ANC rule, it's very important. This was a liberation movement supposed to, that's why it had this rallying electoral slogan of building a better life for all. They built a better life for themselves, Mike. Go to their houses, go to the ANC leaders' homes. You will not believe it. I don't think Oppenheimer and the Nationalist Party politicians ever lived in houses like that, Mike. It's not a funny matter. It's not, I'm telling you, it's serious. Go to the houses of the ANC leaders, Mike. You will not believe it. You will not believe how many bedroomed houses, mansions they live in. The Nationalist Party politicians never lived in those houses. It's very important. I remember once I interviewed, Luli Kalinikos, the historian. She said, Ebrahim, one of the distinguishing things, she's of good age. She comes from the 30s, 40s. She said, is the amount of money they get paid. She says it is the most startling thing. And she's obviously comparing it, and Luli is a very informed, historian, with NP rule and ANC rule. And she's an ANC supporter, she wrote the authorized biography of Oliver Tambo. The best thing that has been produced on is by Luli Kalinikos. So, Mike, there's a whole lot of things of what has happened to the ANC, But back to MK. I did a column on this thing when Gama and these guys were sworn in last week. I was so revolted, Mike, to be honest with you, that I devoted a column to it, which is, I think, why you're interviewing me now. You must hear, I did a Power FM interview yesterday, and they played Zondo. What Zondo had to say about integrity, of people being sworn into parliament, MPs, etc. And Mike, it's terrible. It just shows you, the very thing that I spoke to you about now, it shows you Zuma himself doesn't care a damn. He doesn't care a damn about the allegations against him. He doesn't care a damn about the allegations against Gama, all those SOE leaders. Nothing, Mike. That is why, you see, he had them sworn in. And I won't be surprised, as I told Power FM yesterday, that some of those people who were fired, removed as MPs of MK, was to make way for Gama and these guys, was to make way, I'm saying. I think there's going to be problems. I think those people who are fighting, their dismissal, I've got a strong case, really. But basically, it's just a very dire moment, I think, to have those type of so heavily tainted, heavily tainted. And then Klope, I mean, after he gets impeached, he gets made the chairperson of the MK party. I mean, what is going on here? So that's why I said it's the most dire, critical moment in our constitutional history, Mike, from the time of the Constitution of 1996 until now. I think really this thing, it's really a slap in the face of constitutional democracy, of parliamentary sovereignty. I mean, for this thing to, and in fact, if you look at public discourse, there's been a lot of response, Facebook, Twitter, and the mainstream media, to the swearing in of these particular three individuals who's been seriously fingered by this. And in fact, Mike, what adds insult to injury is that some of them are facing charges right now. They're in court. So those processes haven't even played itself out. They're in court and they get sworn in.
Now, it seems to be almost a tactic of MK to have these compromised individuals represent them in Parliament. It almost seems like something out of the playbook. I mean, there's very few people that they've got that don't have a smell about them. And I mean, later on in this week, we're going to be talking to Bongani Baloyi, who was the rising star once of the DA. He seems to have, had a complete change of character, but that's beside the point. The thing is, here's a guy who's known to be honest and straight down the line. But other than that, just about every appointment that we've seen has been somebody with a massive question mark. It seems almost to be a tactic of the party. And I'm trying to understand the tactic of the party. I do understand that, Jacob Zuma likes to play the game, but, he's obviously fairly bored down in Nkandla. But, what do you think the impact is going to be? Or do you think, to go back to your first point, it's going to make no difference when it comes voting time? The fact that they've loaded it with people with very questionable CVs.
Yeah, well, there's a mixture of elements in responding to your question. On the one hand, I don't attribute any tactical wisdom whatsoever to, you were saying about, placing these people, making them MPs, swearing them in, maybe a tactical for what? Where's the wisdom of those? It's a self-defeating. It is a self-counterintuitive. I mean, it's crazy, it just reinforces the very thing I've said now. I mean, those people is not, besides Zuma, those people who have been sworn in, Brian Molefe, Gama, and them, I mean, they've been heavily tainted, Mike, if you look at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry reports. And don't forget, I need to tell you something now that I said on Friday night, SABC, and yesterday, Power FM. Did you see what Mbeki said? Yeah. Mbeki said at a UNISA lecture last week, it's very important what I'm about to say, Mike, which throws, it puts it into sharp relief, this whole question of ethics, morality, and placing peoples in. I mean, the parliament is the sacrosanct institution, political integrity ought to reign supreme because they make all the laws of the country, Mike. That's the representative institution of the key institution, parliament. Mbeki said we need to go beyond because Mbeki's been taking note of things. He made a very important thing which I spoke to yesterday with the Power FM. Mbeki said we need to go beyond this thing about you only when people are formally charged. Only when they are formally charged must they step aside. He says no. He says any good, this is the way he put it, any good, reliable, loyal ANC member must step aside even if no formal charges have been laid. If there's credible, suspicious circumstances, strong, compelling, a kind of prima facie case, you must, let your conscience, dictate and step aside, Whether his approach now, he's injected a new element. Let me tell you, it's not there. It's not been there before. It's the first time somebody speaks as clearly as Mbeki has. Whether it will have an impact now on the ANC revisiting the step aside thing. But then, as I said yesterday to Power FM, Ramaphosa is in the box. Betty Montage is in the box because remember that Ramaphosa was found to have a prima facie case to answer to regarding Palapala. The parliamentary panel, independent, found that. And the NC said, you know what, basically go to hell with your report. They closed ranks. They prevented even the discussion or debate of that parliamentary, and Parliament requested it. They prevented. That's how. Why do you think he went on to resign? Ramaphosa wanted to resign in November, December 2022, Mike. That's how serious it was. But what I'm trying to say now, and did you hear what Professor Sipho Seepe said last week? Yeah, when this thing came of Semelani, when they were calling for her neck and they said she must resign and she must step aside at least, etc. Sipho Seepe said, no, if she must step aside, then Ramaphosa must step aside. In fact, you know what? If you go and look at that parliamentary report, there's some pretty compelling evidence. That's why they said, you have a prima facie case to answer, President. They were not swayed by his version of events, Mike, of what happened on Palapala. They were not. And still, the ANC kicked them in the butt. They closed ranks and no discussion or debate took place. And you've seen that's why the EFF has taken it up. I don't know if you're aware, the EFF has taken this up before Floyd Chabambu went over to MK. It's going to court about the grounds upon which the National Assembly, how they dealt with that Palapala report, But I don't want to get distracted too much, Mike. But I'm just saying that we're sitting with a serious problem, and now it's reared its ugly head in those people who've been sworn into Parliament, last week. And it's very serious issues. How it's going to work out, I don't know.
Well, one could look forward, I suppose, at some point for the swearing in of Thembi Simelane as a MK parliamentarian. That sort of will follow the trend if this whole issue continues with what she did when she was mayor at Polokwane. But Ebrahim, I'd like to just switch attention in a similar vein to the government of national unity. We've discussed MK, their questionable tactic, whether it's going to hurt them or not at the polls, but let's look for a minute at the government of national unity. What's your view on the way it was formed and the prospects for success, if it will last? What's your view on the GNU?
Hey, Mike, you know what? I don't know if you've been following the media on this in commentary. It's a very dicey thing, really. I think forget about the terminology now for the moment. Government of national unity versus coalition politics and the debate about what is it, etc. That level of formality and characterization. Let's look at the way to assess the government of national unity is less with those issues. Forget about it, the terminology, what you want to call it. What you must do, this is the key and critical context within which this thing has to take shape and be effective in addressing the worst ever crisis in post-apartheid South Africa. Is it up to it? The ANC reached out. You can see what it has done to its alliance partners, Mike. Just look at it. Any discussion of the GNU cannot take place without looking at the response of Solly Maipela SACP, COSATU, to the ANC striking this, deal with Zilla and with the DA. And although I think their arguments are very weak, let me tell you, one of the biggest, and I come from the trade unions, they're messing up both the SACP, more the SACP and less COSATU, because the SACP solely now is becoming the leading voice of questioning the integrity in the first place. What are they doing with a colonial racist party, the DA? It's a lot of nonsense as far as I'm concerned, Mike. Let me tell you why nonsense. Where you see, if then you must have opposed the ANC forming a coalition with the DA in the municipalities. How can you allow that to go ahead? And then they formalize an agreement at GNU level after the elections when the ANC lost it. They lost it. They were forced into that. Remember, that's why what Ramaphosa, there's obviously a lot of other interests. There's no doubt, Mike. Let's talk truth to power. White-dominated private sector wanted it, Mike. No, come on. They wanted it to stability and stuff. They wanted that the ANC DA to come together to rescue the situation. They think it's going to rescue it. I think it's going to end up worsening the crisis. I'm still going to explain that. But the SACP and COSATU have got one fundamental weakness in their arguments about the incompatibility. This is what they're saying. How could the ANC form an alliance, coalition government with our oppressors, the DA, racists, whites, Zilla, all? They should have raised their voice. This is a principal matter. They should have raised their voice. Why did they not? They said nothing about the ANC having a coalition arrangement in Tshwane, in Joburg, all over. As an extension of that, you can then say, what are you doing now? But they shut up. They said nothing about it at local level. Now they're crying foul and they want to attack the ANC. Now there's a serious fundamental contradiction discursively and politically and ideologically at that level, which they need to deal with, and they haven't. None of them have I seen them speak to this issue. If you're raising your voice now and in clamoring in opposition to because of the why did you say nothing in all the coalition government arrangements at local level that brings the DA and the ANC together? It's a critical question to answer, and it's very difficult to get out of it. And that's probably why they don't go there. They just avoid it completely and go on ad nauseum about why this is but I'll tell you, it's that, and it's other things that the GNU is going to not deliver. Mike, I do not want to sound like a prophet of doom. The GNU, policy-wise, I'm saying policy-wise, is going to, because that's the only way you're going to get to grips. You had to hear Pali Leotla yesterday on Power FM. He was also just before me on the thing, and what he had to say of why this ANC government, well, it lost power on the 29th, has been failing to get to grips with the economic crisis because of the macroeconomic framework that they were dealing with, Mike, a liberal, neoliberal set of macroeconomic instruments. It started with Gare in 1996, and Pali Leotla, a statistician general, should know these things. He worked closely with Trevor Manuel. He says, there's our problem. And if you listen to him, you would have thought, this guy's been very gloomy, about our future. It's a very serious problem, Mike. So, I'm just saying there are lots of other things besides the fact that they're going to get hell. There's no doubt from the opposition benches. And don't think that Floyd Shivambu joining MK is going to compromise the ferocity of the opposition that's going to come from what they call the Progressive Caucus. And which is dominated by who? It's dominated by MK and EFF. That is what it is. The others are small parties, in this Progressive Caucus, and they're going to constitute the heart of the official opposition. No, the ANC is in very serious trouble with that. I'm just saying, but there's a number of factors why I think the GNU is not going to do very well. In fact, I think it matters most, especially in terms of arresting the socio-economic crisis, dealing with the worst poverty, unemployment, and I think it's going to fail in regard because it doesn't have the policy instruments, Mike. They're just continuing with the same old neoliberal macroeconomic framework. And this comes from Pali Leotla. You must remember, ANC people, you know, your statistician general, they're arguing that now. So I'm just saying, Mike, you know, it's going to be a very tough, stormy road ahead for the GNU.
If it is that bumpy road that you are foreseeing, what is the alternative? That's the thing that is not becoming clear to me, and I would suggest that the voters, you know, kind of agree with us to say, you may be right, but what is the alternative?
Well, you
If
know,
you're going
Mike,
to leave one thing for another, what is the other?
well, you know, Mike, that is the question. That is the big question. It's been the big question, you know what, from 1994. It's been the big question. Let me explain to you why it's been the big question. Unanswered. And that's why you find our politics is dominated, Mike, by the African nationalists in the ANC. And now you see this guy coming up now, Gayton McKenzie with the Patriotic Alliance. I mean, and just look what is the state of our politics. We're talking about MK. Look at him. Utterly xenophobic, man, terribly xenophobic. And what does he do? He goes and capture a sizable chunk of the colored working class vote in the Western Cape and Cape Town. I mean, 9 seats in the National Assembly, Mike. Do you see how fractured and really poisonous ultimately our politics is, Mike? It's a mess. You know, and then Cyril makes him Minister of Sport. I mean, God, man, Mike. So you see the so-called independent left. Those are the genuine socialists, let's say, but they outside of the ANC alliance. They're critical of the SA, the Stalinists, SACP, they say, etc., etc. They were your Neville Alexander, who passed away, you know, the Workers' Organization for Socialist Action, WASA, and a lot of other smaller left independent groupings, especially centered in the Western Cape and Cape Town in particular. They also, I mean, they've been marginalized totally. Look at Azapo. Look what happened to Azapo. Look what happened to the PSC. They've just picked up a little bit now with the recent elections, I think 1 seat or something. They lost it before. That is how fractured. So it's a dire situation because the frank truth, you know what is it, Mike? There has to be no. That is why the independent left has been paralyzed on the margins, on the outskirts, on the periphery of the mass movement, you know, and they don't have 1 seat in parliament. I'm not talking of ZAPO now. I'm not talking of PSC. Oh, I'm talking about that Western Cape bunch in particular. And they had very good heads on their shoulders. Very good. If you read their documents, brilliant analysis, etc. But not 1 seat in parliament, and therefore lacking the political clout to make any big changes because they're not part of the, you see, of the parliament and, you know, that machinery to make an impact that, you know, this is constitutional democracy, Mike. You know, this is what maybe a lot of people never prepared for this. They thought they're going to take power, the NP is going to be squashed, you know, and the ANC. No, it's very different now. It's well, that was already written into the script. That's why you had the 1993 negotiated settlement, you know. The ANC could not take power. MK was like a flea on the back of an elephant. That is what MK was, like a flea, irritating flea on the back of an elephant. And the elephant was the South African Defence Force and the South African NP-controlled state. That's what it was. It had no role to play. So the MK didn't storm the bastions of power and seize power. No, it's a very different thing, Mike, that happened in this country, which is partly why, you know, you have this impotence of the left, you know. It's an impotence. That's what it is, you know. The brilliant ideas, if you sit with these people, Mike, you won't believe it. They're brilliant in conversations, in discussions, in understanding, and yet not 1 seat in parliament, you see.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we're going to, you know, what I'm sure many of their documents see is a sort of a communist 1960s utopia, which didn't even work where they tried it. But there has been the rise of the independent right, hasn't there?
Yeah, but you must be very careful what you said now, Mike, because if you have to invite some of these people, they'll tear you apart, believe me, in your
Oh, the
studio.
invitation's open.
No,
Eh?
no, no, because those people
More
I'm
than
speaking
happy.
about, Mike, you mustn't get caught up in stuff like that. Let me tell you. You see this knee-jerk thing about communism that hasn't succeeded. Those same people will give you the very strong critics of what they call Stalinism. They didn't think that there was socialism, even forget about communism in the former Soviet Union. It was a bankrupt Stalinist state. There are a lot of things, Mike, about it. They took their stand against it. The Hungarian 56 uprising was crushed by the tanks. The 68 Czechoslovakian uprising was crushed by Soviet tanks. They're critical of all those things. So they are not talking about those people, Mike. They are good shoulders on their heads, these people. They're very critical of what was called communism, etc. But Mike, it's very important. I think maybe you should one day invite one of these people, and I can tell you who to invite. There's too many people. No, really, to give you
Hopefully
another
we'll get this
perspective,
together.
Mike. Yeah, to give you another perspective, it's important. What we lack in this culture, Mike, is a culture of debate. And vigorous debate and drawing in all opinions. We need more of that, which is why I think your show is good, Mike, because I think you're not, don't take an ideological stance. I'm, for example, an unrepentant socialist, for example. Oh, no, absolutely, but you invite me to your show,
I do, and I enjoy talking to you, but I want to ask you, I want to just, as we close off, I want to ask you, yeah, and I understand that this is a bit like picking a winner of the Durban July, but yeah, you said that you've got your doubts about the government of national unity for good reason, because what do they stand for? These sort of nexus points, the corruption associated with some of the people in the ANC, some of the behavior of the DA appointing people that are questionable and so on. In your opinion, how long is this going to last? Do you see, or how do you see it playing out? Literally, do you see them making it to the 2029 election?
Well, that is a very, very crucially important question. And the reason why you pose it in the first place strikes at the heart of the vulnerability of the GNU. That is why I started off by saying the way to assess the GNU is to see that, unfortunate for itself, it is born in the midst of the worst cynicism towards the ANC and the government. You can see, Mike, black poverty especially, and not just blacks, but Mike, you must go and see the mushrooming of white squatter settlements across the country, in lots of areas, there's a rising white poverty problem. No one talks about it. The white middle class has been decimated, Mike, by AA and BE. Lots of things happen, and you should maybe have a show about this thing, Go to Krugersdorp and other places, go and see how a lot of the poor white people are living, Mike. So one has to look at all these things. But back to the GNU. It's a very the most crisis-ridden moment ever in post-apartheid South Africa that the GNU is born into. That is the first thing to register, and it's not just that. It's not just the economic, socio-economic, and political crisis. Amongst the key challenges this GNU is going to face, let me tell you something, Mike, and I can't say anything but it. I'd be lying to you, is Ramaphosa himself. That Pala scandal, Mike, is going to come back to haunt him. I'm telling you, it's going to come back to haunt him. Watch what's going to happen when this thing really gets moving in Parliament. The opposition and things. There's been a lot of teething problems. People are working out things, a whole lot of stuff. And they've already given notice. They've gone to court, to challenge how the National Assembly dealt with the Pala report, the EFF. Don't forget that. Dali Mpofu and them are big behind that thing. It's going to come to court. It's going to become a big thing. Don't think it's finished with. It's not over until the fat lady sings, it's coming, Mike. But one of the biggest contradictions, and I'll tell you why. Ramaphosa, in many respects, Pala is worse than Nkandla. I don't want to get into it now because it will take up a lot of time. But in some respects, considerably worse than Nkandla. He got away scot-free. Well, I think, he was decent enough, and his conscience maybe pricked him enough to want to resign, Mike. Ramaphosa was going to resign, and can I tell you now in public, the main reason why I never resigned, and who? Because they're inseparable, the two of them. Gwede Mantashe, more than anyone else, prevailed upon Ramaphosa, Cyril. Say, don't go, don't resign. That's what happened there. There were other people too, yes, in the NSC and so, but Gwede Mantashe, prevailed upon Cyril not to resign. I'm just saying this is a very big thing, Mike. If the head of state and the president of the ANC is so compromised there, Sipho Sepe raised it last week again. He raised it in relation to Simelane. He says if she must step aside, what about our president regarding Palapala? And Cyril knows Palapala is not gone to sleep. He knows it. He knows what's coming. And Mike, how Ramaphosa is going to navigate this matter. And I'll tell you, if you ask Judge Zondo deep down, let me tell you, deep down, this is a big thing, Mike. What he thinks of Palapala. He was not happy. I can tell you now, Zondo was not happy with how the ANC closed ranks and prevented even a discussion and debate. Mike, can you believe that? I mean, he was very seriously compromised in terms of parliamentary code of ethics and the executive. I mean, they wouldn't even allow a debate and discussion in Parliament, which shows you how little faith they had in the version of events of Palapala that Ramaphosa gave the independent parliamentary panel. Because if they had faith in it, they would have allowed the debate to take place and tear to shreds whatever, arguments the opposition wanted to mount. They had little faith in Ramaphosa's version of Palapala. That is why they just they sabotaged the whole thing. And so I'm just saying, Mike, it's one of the big challenges facing the GNU, besides, objectively speaking, the worst, multifaceted, deepest systemic structural crisis ever in the history of South Africa. Now, deepening as we speak, Mike, deepening as we speak now, and the GNU has been formed and it's supposed to perform. And you heard Pali Leotla, what he had to say. So, Mike, I don't want to sound unnecessarily like a prophet of doom, but I'm very doubtful of the efficacy of this GNU and it delivering, because they haven't even understood the roots of the crisis. The ANC has not even come to terms with the neoliberalism that has captured it from 1996 with Gare. And if you fail at the policy level to appreciate where you've gone wrong and why you've gone wrong, and you can't even debate it, I mean, Mike, which is what Pali Leotla was saying yesterday on Power FM. Our macroeconomics is wrong. He says we're trying to use this market economics several times. Go and listen to that interview of Pali Leotla. He said market economics. What the hell is going on here? We've got to change our tools, our instruments, and our policy architecture, Mike. And this is what Pali Leotla was speaking about. So, I'm only referring to him because it's not just me sitting here and wanting to sound gloomy about this. I'm very worried that I think they're going to pick up very serious problems. And remember, the Progressive Caucus and the opposition in Parliament has not even begun to get into their act, Mike, and to deal with Palapala and other issues. And already, these cracks are appearing.
Well, Ebrahim Harvey, there we go. Very comprehensive. You have left so many things that we need to speak about in future interviews, but it is always wonderful to hear from you. We're going to be monitoring all of these things as they go along. Government of National Unity, what the alternatives are, and I agree with you. Things are going to get a lot hotter than what they are now. Yeah, there is no doubt. Ebrahim Harvey, thank you so much for joining us as ever and sharing your wisdom with us. To everybody that watched today, subscribe to the channel, support Pace Car Rental. We'll see you again.